Hello and welcome to this installment of a webinar for Building Trust in Trying Times from Better Business Bureau. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll let you know right off the top that this is being recorded and will be available for playback on YouTube, Facebook, and a number of other areas. And this specific is live for BBB accredited businesses, and we appreciate you joining us for what is going to be a fantastic conversation that is much needed in these times today. We are honored to have Michael Beer with us. Michael is the Connors Robb Professor of Business Administration Emeritus at Harvard Business School. He is a co-founder and director of TruePoint. It's a management consultancy, as well as co-founder and chairman of the Center for Higher Ambition Leadership. It's a nonprofit whose mission is to help companies and their leaders do well by doing good. He's a well-known authority in the areas of organizational effectiveness, organizational change, leadership, and human resource management. Michael is the author of, get this, 12 books, including the award-winning The Critical Path to Corporate Renewal, High Commitment, High Performance, and Higher Ambition, and Fit to Compete, Why Honest Conversations and Your Company's Capabilities Are the Key to a Winning Strategy. He's the recipient of numerous professional and academic honors, among them the Academy of Management's Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Award and the Society for Human Resource Management's Michael R. Losey Excellence in Human Resource Research Award. Michael, thank you so much for being with us today and taking time out for our conversation.
It's my pleasure.
And just so folks know in the background, we're in a time of constant change with COVID-19 as we record this. And Michael's computer had a series of issues today, and we were able to make this work. So he's using his telephone to dial in. Nothing is going to stand in the way of having this conversation. So Michael, thank you for persisting through that. And as we were chatting before the webinar started, you used the term several times. Courageous conversations. And I'm thinking there are a number of opportunities for businesses to be having courageous conversations, especially at this time. And we're going to talk through and spend the next few minutes on how to have those courageous conversations in your business so that you survive the next 30 to 60, 90 days and come out on the other end ready to thrive as this wraps up. So as that is our foundation, we actually found you through a Harvard Business School article, How the Coronavirus is Already Rewriting the Future of Business. And in that, you wrote, the coronavirus challenge demands an organization-wide, honest conversation that enables truth to speak power about the corporate response to the challenge. So as that for our foundation for a conversation today, and we're going to get into your book, Fit to Compete, where is the opportunity for business right now, considering everything that's going on in our world?
Great question. Let me just back up a little bit and tell you how I got to make that statement. For the last, back in 1990, Ray Gilmartin, who was then the CEO of Becton Dickinson, now an $18 or so billion company in terms of revenue, came to me and said, Mike, we have great strategy. We know what we want to do. And they were all former strategists. But we are having difficulty executing that. So we reasoned that one of the things that Gilmartin needed to know, as every leader, including everyone on the line here who's running a business needs to know, is how people below the organization see both the strengths of the organizations and the barriers that are preventing the company from achieving a stated strategy and direction that the CEO or the leader or the business unit leader or whatever is espousing. And it's based on long understood research that truth cannot speak to power very easily. There are always a few people who can do it, but even if they do, it doesn't create a collective understanding that the senior team can agree is valid and needs to be acted on. So we created a process, which I won't go into right now, but I will later, with a set of principles about how the senior team can have a conversation with lower levels about barriers to the direction they're trying to achieve. all the companies we worked in, we worked with over 800 organizations, over 105 corporations in enabling such conversations. All of them were facing a challenge, a discontinuity in their business, a crisis of some kind, and loss of customers or whatever it might be, lower profits than they wanted, and so on. So we learned that by having honest conversations through an approach I'll talk about later, they were able to respond and make change rapidly, effectively, and with commitment, trust, and commitment from all the people in the organization. So fast forward to today. COVID-19 presents a major challenge to every organization on the phone here today, on the webinar today. These changes, COVID-19 is upending strategies, business models, and will require the senior team to restate their direction in some way, a strategy, if you will, for coping with COVID-19, and the values by which they want to lead and run the company to be able to create trust and create commitment. And any crisis requires clarity about direction. So the senior team has to do exactly what we found we had to get senior teams to do before they could even have an honest conversation, which is say, this is what we want to achieve. This is the kind of organization we'd like to be culturally from a trust and commitment point of view. And then to go to an inquiry process, which is what do all of you see as a way, as the barriers and the strengths and the barriers in the organization to accomplish that. That process itself produces high levels of trust. Most organizations, all organizations are hierarchical, and power differentials prevent people from speaking up, which is what it prevents honest conversations. And one of the reasons is that they are afraid to talk to the top. There are no ways to talk to them safely, productively, and constructively. So the way this applies to the COVID crisis is the senior team has to get together and say, what does all this mean? Where are we taking this in the next 3 months, the next 6 months? You can't look too far out because things are changing. How do we find out what people see as the barriers to not only achieving our business, but also living to our values? We may say we want to take care of our people. We want to have well, what is it that's going on that people see as achieving that, and what do they see that's preventing that? That honesty is required for senior teams to shift, make adjustments to not only what they're doing, but what they'd like to do, but also what they are doing, how to achieve that. So my reasoning here is that the same logic that allowed us to help companies and smaller businesses, business units, et cetera, change their direction and achieve the results they want applies to this particular crisis. And because they all had crises, but they were not COVID crises, they were other crises. So the basic principle is that what you want to do is to have senior teams advocate a direction and inquire into what blocks into the quality of the direction, because people lower levels have ideas about that. So if they want to do something to adjust to the COVID crisis strategically, does that make sense? And also, what do people see as barriers to living to the values and culture that the senior team has advocated? So this is a ongoing way to understand how your system of organizing and leading is achieving or not achieving what you're trying to do. The difference, we were working on a longer time frame, looking out at the strategy maybe 3 to 5 years. We're now in a very crisis situation, so the same ideas need to be rapidly recycling. You need to rapidly recycle, clarifying the direction, talking about changes in it as you see need to change it, getting information from lower levels about what is blocking us from doing it, and then acting on it, and telling the rest of the organization that we've heard this and this is what we're doing, because that is what increases trust. In most organizations I've worked with, people don't think the organization can change because they've never been in a dialogue with senior management where they knew they were making a difference. And management was saying, you made a difference, here's what we're changing as a result of it. So that's the principle here. And I think it applies exactly to the COVID crisis, because all the same things you need in any crisis is present. A clear direction, a clear understanding of what's blocking your achievement of that direction, whether it be a cultural direction, a cultural and a business direction, it's both, and adjustments that are then made clear to lower levels that they've made a difference. So you want people to step up here and really do what they can to do the right thing for the company and for them, and for the culture, for the people in the organization.
So when you talk about that conversation and the communication inside the organization, in the book, you laid out a process, I'm going to call it, for two-way communication. And you said from top down, it's what it takes to compete. So that's the leadership saying, here's what we've got to do to compete in our current situation. Right. And then you said from the bottom up, it's what are our strengths and our weaknesses. And so there's an aligned communication there. So break that down for us and expound on that, on what leadership needs to be telling. And this is for an organization of 2 to 3 people, up to 2 to 300 to 2 to 3,000 people. It works regardless. But talk about which areas of the organization and how people in various places in the organization, what is their responsibility when it comes to communication?
Well, when we've talked traditionally about communication, it's usually about how the top can communicate more clearly, better PowerPoints, more webinars, more whatever. But communication one way is not enough. This is basically about arguing that it's got to be a conversation. Think about yourself and a good friend. But there's some problems in the relationship. You're reluctant to make that clear and honest because you're afraid of defensiveness. You're afraid of rejection. You don't want to hurt the person. So the conversation doesn't take place. In organizations, the stakes are too high. You can't avoid these conversations. So the process is very much as I described. Now, if you want me to go into the methodology we applied or the principles we've used, I can do that for sure. But we've learned that the reason that these conversations don't take place, we also have learned, by the way, what most organizations find are what we call the silent killers. That is, these are things known to the lower levels that about the organization that are blocking it from responding to the strategic crisis that they're facing, or in this case, COVID-19. And all of these barriers are basically threatening to talk about. And I can go through that as well. But the process is simply the senior team has to state a direction clearly in about 1 to 2 pages, no more than that. They need to then find a way to get truth to speak to power. Now that's the trick. You can't just go around and ask a few people, and you've got to get a cross section of the whole organization. So what we did is we thought in any large organization above 100, and we have done it in so the numbers just shrink a little bit. We've done it in smaller organizations. In any organization, you want to get a cross section of the top of the key people, key 100 people, inside and outside. Could include your suppliers, your partners, your et cetera, your customers for sure, in a conversation about what is blocking, from your perspective, what is blocking our ability to achieve the trust and the business direction and the results we're trying to achieve. And that has to be collected. That information has to be collected to make it both valid and compelling to the senior team. Senior teams can't just ask 1 or 2 people, because as soon as you ask 1 or 2, you never know whether they're biased or not, and the whole senior team will not buy into it. So you need the compelling voice of the organization, and you need to deliver it in some way to the senior team in a way that they will accept it and not resist it and not be defensive about it. So we created a process where we ask a task force, where the senior team appoints a task force of people where they will believe. They go out and interview 100 or so people. It can vary, but that's roughly a number we found that works for large companies like Merck, or smaller companies, you know, of 100 or 200, 300, or whatever number. And those people, those members of the task force, need to interview people. Tell me what you find are the strengths, and tell me what is blocking us right now from achieving the COVID-19 adjusted direction that we're trying to go into. And that information needs to get quickly to the top. The top needs to reflect on it and needs to take action on it immediately. Normally, these processes take a long time in organizations. There's politicking, there is resistance for some people to the ideas that are being brought up. The approach we're talking about, when there's a compelling voice of the organization that's put in front of the senior team, and they embrace the information and act on it, and do not take any reprisals. In fact, they thank the senior team, the people in the organization and the task force for delivering the data. That's very, very powerful. It immediately creates trust. The reason trust is hard to build is that in order to create a trusting relationship, the senior leaders have to make themselves vulnerable. By the act of making themselves vulnerable, that is asking for feedback, honest feedback, compelling feedback, they, by definition, are saying, I trust you in the organization to come back and tell me the truth, and I trust you, and therefore you will also trust me. So all trust is built through making one of the parties has to make itself vulnerable, so that it sends a signal that says, I trust you not to take advantage of me because I'm being completely vulnerable here and telling you what I'm telling you. And that's the basic principle we're talking about here. Follow up with some questions if that's not clear.
So, yeah, let's take a look at what's happening right now in our current circumstances. 6.6 million people have applied for unemployment in the United States. And you know, the stimulus package came out last week with significant help. I think top of mind for everyone is, I want to keep my job. And typically that level of fear in somebody is going to prevent them from speaking up, especially something honest. So what are some specific tools that a business owner can put into practice to overcome that level of fear that people are real fear that people are experiencing right now?
Well, the first thing is for senior teams to say in the direction, in the statement of what they're trying to achieve, is to say, we are going to, I would say, we're going to try to do the very best we can to keep you here, maybe at a lower, cutting some salaries and wages, but we want to keep you here. We want your help in solving this crisis. And that by itself begins to create a common, as we have found in all honest conversation, it brings people together to think about the larger good of the whole organization. That's the point of honest conversation. So once you establish that, and you're clear with people that you're going to do the best you can, but you can't promise anything, but you want to know what they can do. And also, if you are responding with your human resource policies and practices in a way consistent with the aspiration of keeping people, you will learn quickly whether you are doing what you're trying to do, whether your desire to do it in the right way by keeping people and doing it in a way that's fair. You're going to learn quickly whether you are or are not doing that. You're going to hear some ideas for different policies and practices. Why don't we take a 20% cut instead of just a 10% cut? People will begin to pitch in, as opposed to simply firing people. So making the part of the conversation is, how do we maintain, you have to want to do that, obviously. I want to maintain the team as much as I can. Help me understand better what we're doing that's right in that direction and what we're doing that is failing to achieve that direction. Well, you've got human resource policy number one, and that's not working for us. okay, let's change it. I'm making all this up, obviously, but
Mhm.
the conversation will lead to a clear understanding of people's fears and what they're and bringing them on board to solve the problem. So the team nature of this, it brings the whole organization together, thinking about the larger good. That itself is a powerful tool to get people to reduce their fear because they have some control. The problem in most organizations, lower levels don't have any control over the circumstances in which they're operating. This does give them that control because they can state clearly what it is that they think needs to be changed, and senior management would say, well, we've heard you, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and why.
So you've provided a poll question for our audience. I think now would be a great time to ask that poll question. And as the answers come in, I'll keep you updated because I know you're looking at your tiny phone screen as we do
Yeah.
this. So the poll is up on the screen. And as you are listening in, I ask you to answer these questions. Number one, can truth speak to power? Top management in your organization about strategic, organizational, and leadership barriers that impede effectiveness, trust, and performance? Yes or no? So this is what's going on inside your organization right now as you listen to this. Can truth speak to power? And I think it's, as the answers come in, Mike, I'd like to have you address human nature in these situations.
Sure.
When we as leaders are faced with crisis, we tend to, as human beings, put our heads down, get ready to take on the fight, so to speak. And we don't necessarily stand back and open up our ears, our eyes to what's being said around us from the organization. You pull the team in, you pull the executive team, you pull the leadership team, you own the owners into a room, and you say, let's create a strategy to fight this without listening to the employees first. So how do you address that and recognize that piece of human nature and fight against it, as unnatural as it seems?
Well, obviously it has to start with the senior team, with the leader. And if the leader does not understand and does not want to hear, then it's very difficult to create. So all my research shows that the leader is key. They have to want to hear. Now, and they have to open up and make themselves vulnerable, that is, ask for feedback in a coherent and compelling way that I discussed. And once that happens, that frees up the other part of human nature, the people at lower levels who hitherto have felt it too threatening to talk about issues that are critical. And so I have no magic for the leader. I mean, the leader has to be willing and want to create a solid team working for the larger good. If they are approaching this in a more narrow sense of wanting to keep the share price high or avoiding a cut in their bonus, there's no way. Okay, so this does all rely on the senior team, the senior leader, wanting to have that kind of an open conversation and making themselves vulnerable. And I have the only thing I can say about that if the board of directors of the organization, and I got some examples of where it would really help, should demand that the leader goes through this kind of a process. That's really the check on the leader. If the leader is not ready to lead, of course, this is a very counterintuitive, counter-conventional way of creating trust, commitment, and improvement in the organization. So that would be my response to the human dynamics. The human dynamics at the lower levels are clear. I'm going to affect my career. I may even lose my job. I'm going to be ostracized. I'm going to be called a non-team player, and they all believe that because they've seen it happen. So this is a way to break that cycle, but the leader has to want to do it.
So we've got about 94% of our respondents are saying yes, their organization is one in which truth speaks to power. I'll
tell you, we have a very special set of organizations here, and maybe that because they're members of the Better Business Bureau, that may be the reason. But I would say it's much lower than that in most organizations.
So I've got a question because I was not aware we were going to put both poll questions up. And I think our second poll question needs some clarification from you. So you list the silent killers, and I believe in your book, you've got 6 silent killers
Right,
that
right.
you talk about in the organization. And I don't know that we've listed them out here as I've been multitasking through this. But are the silent killers the unclear, flawed strategy and
Yeah,
unclear values,
I
poor
can go
coordination?
quickly through them. It's an unclear strategy, conflicting priorities, uh, and sometimes no human values, that lack of clear values. That's number one. Number two, it's an ineffective team. All these are related to each other and create a syndrome of mutually reinforced ineffective senior team, a leader who's either too top down or doesn't engage in the organization at all. So it's a fear of constructive conflict on the part of the leader. The fourth is a lack of coordination across the organization. Department A and Department B, Business 1 and Business 2, are not collaborating in a way that will allow us to get things done in an efficient and effective way. And usually because the senior team has not really designed the organization, make clear roles, responsibilities, decision rights, sometimes even the structure itself that allows coordination to happen easily. The fifth is lack of leadership, and not enough leadership development, and therefore not enough down the line leaders to execute things quickly. And the sixth one is the inability of truth to speak to power. So all these organizational flaws, their inadequacies in the organization's capability, leadership and management capabilities, do not come to the surface. The basic argument is that all failures in organizations relate to these fundamental organizational and leadership and management capabilities. The 5 barriers, and the 6th barrier being silence, which is also a lack of capability. Because if you don't have a senior team that's prioritizing, you can't create coordination. If the senior team doesn't know there's politics and poor coordination, or not enough, somebody's not putting their force against the oar, they can't do anything about it. So it's a vertical communication that opens these things up.
So back to our first poll question, and where we've got now 93% who say that their organizations can speak truth to power. What are some tests that a leader can run to make sure that that's an actual accurate statement that they're making for their organization? How do we test that theory?
Well, the first thing I would ask the people who listed that can they tell the senior team that they're ineffective? Can they tell can they provide data that demonstrate that the leader is either too top down, or that they're not engaging enough, too laissez-faire, if you will, or hands off? Can they talk about these very real leadership and personal issues? That can they tell the top that there's politicking going on, or that we're not collaborating sufficiently between X and Y, Department A and Department B? If they can say those things to the senior team, then I would say those 93%, that 93% is valid. But I want them to think about hard, can I really talk about those? It's not about, the color of the lunchroom, of the dining room. It's really about fundamental management and leadership issues. And if those can be discussed, the argument is they can be changed and the improvement can occur. So I don't know what the answer would be if you put the same question to them once can they put the silent killers on the table? That's really the question.
So I'm going to encourage any of our participants to jump into that Q&A box on the webinar to ask Michael Beer a question, if any of them are out there. We've gone a full 30 minutes and have kept all of our participants engaged. I want to thank you so much, Michael, for this. And I'm going to remind folks of the book. It is Fit to Compete: Why Honest Conversations about the company's capabilities, or about your company's capabilities, are the key to a winning strategy. I've read this book, and I will tell you that there are tools, actionable tools, great stories about Mike's work with businesses that you can put into practice in your business. And if you're looking to be ready to address the challenges that are in front of you right now, the challenges that are going to come down the line. This idea of opening up the lines of communication and building trust inside your organization are key for your success. Any final words for us, Mike, as we wrap this up?
Simply remember that the key to success is to have a vertical communication between the top and the middle or bottom or upper middle of the organization to find out what's blocking your ability to cope with the COVID crisis, or the direction you're taking in it, or the policies and practices that affect people. You're going to learn a lot, and you need to do that because trust is essential for people to really do their all to meet this grave challenge. You can use it for this, and you can use it for more traditional challenges of business, as I discuss in the book.
So we do have some questions coming in. Nick
Sure.
said, when soliciting feedback from your team, do you recommend that it be done formally or informally, on paper or in conversation?
No, in direct conversation. We've learned that direct conversation is essential. We set up ground rules. The senior team cannot challenge what the task force says, cannot ask them where they got the information because they've got it anonymously from people they talk to. They're bringing forth the key ideas. They're reporters. And that ground rules are essential, but it's got to be face-to-face, because what we learned was that it's the face-to-face that creates an emotional response by the senior team. We learned that a lot of senior teams kind of knew some of these problems existed, but they didn't really act on them until they heard the emotional cry for help from those below them to fix some of these problems. And I would argue the same thing is true here. Somebody's going to feel in your organization that they're not being fairly treated. Well, or some group of people. You need to know that.
Our good friend Colleen writes in, how frequently do you recommend leaders have discussion during this time of crisis? Is there a point of over-communication that drives inefficiency rather than efficiency?
Yeah, I think it depends on the crisis. It depends on a lot of situations. I would say normally we think about this about regularly, meaning a year or a year and a half or 6 months, depending on the rapidity of change. The point is COVID is rapidly evolving. So you need to do this in a quick cycle way. I would say, every couple of 3 months, or even shorter, depending on how you sense the business is changing. But yes, you can overdo it. I think the other recommendation I make, what you hear from these conversations are high-level issues of problems, but you then need to actually second some group to fix those problems and then hear from them and how they're doing. So as rapid a cycle as is possible without, as you say, I completely agree with the questioner, you can overdo it.
Fantastic. Once again, the book, Fit to Compete, Why Honest Conversations About Your Company's Capabilities Are the Key to a Winning Strategy. So appropriate right now as we help businesses build trust inside their organization. Michael Beer, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to have been with you.
And with that, we will conclude this webinar from Better Business Bureau, as we are bringing these to you weekly on ways that your business can survive these next 60, 90, even 120 days and come out thriving, building trust along the way. The recording of this will be available, posted to YouTube, along with a variety of social media channels. And once again, our thanks to Michael Beer. And with that, we will sign off.